There is a moment Greg still thinks about, not the argument, not the lawyer's office, not the day he carried boxes out of a home he'd spent 11 years building. He thinks about a fork, the small sound it made against a ceramic plate, and the way Amanda didn't even look up. This is the story of Gregory Allen Mercer and his wife Amanda Louise Mercer. On paper, theirs was a good marriage. 13 years of shared meals, shared debts, shared silences on Sunday mornings. Greg was the kind of man who fixed things before you asked him to. Leaky faucets, dead batteries, the way the back gate swung too hard in wind. Amanda was sharp and funny and had a laugh that could fill a room. But somewhere between the early years and the later ones, they had quietly stopped being each other's comfort. They had become, instead, each other's habit. And habits, as most people learn too late, are not the same as love. This is the story of how one ordinary dinner cracked something open, and how two people handled what came spilling out. Greg and Amanda had a rhythm. Most long marriages do. Weekday mornings, he was up first. Coffee on, radio low, eggs if he had the time. Amanda would come down in her robe, hair loose, and she'd take her mug without quite saying thank you. Not out of rudeness, he told himself, just familiarity. The kind of closeness where gratitude becomes assumed. He had believed that for a long time. They lived in a house on Delmore Street with a backyard that needed attention every spring, and a kitchen they'd renovated 3 years ago, when things between them still felt like a shared project. Their daughter Nora had left for college 2 years before this story begins, and when Nora left, something shifted in the house. The noise did. The purpose of the daily routine. When you spend 15 years organizing a life around a child, you sometimes forget to ask what the marriage looks like underneath. Greg worked in logistics management. Not glamorous work, but steady. He was good at it. He liked the problem solving, the clarity of it. A shipment either arrived or it didn't. A route either worked or it needed fixing. He sometimes wished people were as straightforward as supply chains. Amanda ran a small interior design consultancy from home. She had talent, real talent, and a client list that had grown steadily over the past few years. She was proud of it, and Greg was proud of her, though he sometimes felt he'd forgotten how to say so in a way she could hear. It was around this time that Amanda's cousin, Philip Darrow, began appearing more frequently in their lives. Philip was the kind of man who walked into rooms already talking. He was charming in a loud way. Opinions on everything, stories for every silence. He had been through his own divorce 2 years prior and had emerged from it, somehow, more confident than before. Amanda found him energizing. Greg found him exhausting. But he was family, and Greg was not the kind of man who made scenes over instincts he couldn't name. Philip started joining them for dinners, first occasionally, then regularly. He and Amanda would talk for hours about design, about travel, about people Greg didn't know. Greg would clear the plates. He told himself this was generosity. He told himself this was what good husbands did. One evening after Philip had gone and the kitchen was clean, Greg sat across from Amanda and said, "You seem happy when he visits." She looked up from her phone. "He's interesting. You could try talking to him." Greg nodded slowly. "Right." That was all. No argument, no door slammed, just a quiet nod, and then the sound of the television filling the room where conversation used to live. He lay in bed that night listening to Amanda breathe beside him and tried to remember the last time she'd asked him how his day was, and actually waited for the answer. He couldn't quite land on it, and he told himself that was normal, that all marriages had seasons, that this was just winter, and winter always passed. He almost believed it. The dinner at Amanda's Aunt Patricia's house was planned for a Saturday in October. Patricia was the kind of woman who treated family gatherings like productions, good china, assigned seating, multiple courses. Greg had always felt slightly out of place at these dinners, though he'd never said so. He smiled, he helped in the kitchen, he asked after people's children and jobs. He was good at being present without being noticed. That evening, 20 minutes before dinner was served, Greg excused himself from the living room. He didn't need anything from the kitchen. He just needed a moment of quiet, a habit he'd developed over the years when social noise got too dense. He stood just around the corner from the dining room doorway, out of sight, but well within earshot. He wasn't meaning to listen. That's the part he returned to later. He wasn't eavesdropping. He was just standing still in a house where the walls were thin and the voices were too comfortable to be careful. Amanda was talking to her cousin Renata. Greg could picture her exactly, glass of white wine, leaning against the sideboard. That particular relaxed posture she only had when she felt completely at ease. He just doesn't really get it, Amanda was saying. You try to have a conversation about anything beyond the practical, and he just glazes over. It's like talking to someone who's already half checked out. Renata murmured something soft and sympathetic. And it's not even one big thing, Amanda continued. It's just, I don't know. He's fine. He's dependable. But I'm 42 and I feel like I'm disappearing, and he doesn't even notice. There was a pause. Then, almost lightly, Philip actually listens. Like, properly listens. It's embarrassing how much that means to me right now. Greg stood very still. He was aware of his own breathing, aware of the warmth of the house around him and the sound of forks being set out on the table in somewhere. A child laughing. The ordinary texture of an ordinary evening. He had heard the words clearly, every one of them. He walked back into the living room quietly and sat down next to Amanda's Uncle Bernard, who was talking about the weather in the north and the terrible state of motorway traffic. Greg listened carefully. He nodded at the right moments. He did not look at the doorway through which Amanda would shortly walk, carrying her wine glass, and her easy smile, and her complete ignorance of what had just changed. Later, at the table, he watched her, the way she laughed, the way she reached for the bread basket, the way she glanced at Philip across the table with something warm and unguarded in her expression. He thought about the word she'd used. Fine. He's fine. There is something specific about that word when it's used by a person you love to describe you to someone else. It is not cruelty exactly, but it is not kindness either. It sits somewhere in between, in that particular gray zone of intimate disappointment, the kind that has been building so long it no longer sounds like disappointment to the person saying it. It just sounds like fact. Greg picked up his fork. He held it for a moment without moving, then the sound of metal against ceramic as it slipped from his fingers. He looked at his plate. Amanda looked up. The table paused for just a second, the way tables do when a small accident briefly unifies a room. You all right? She said, already half turned back toward the conversation. He picked the fork up again. Fine, he said quietly. The words sat in his chest like a stone. He looked around the table, at the faces he'd known for years, at the cheerful noise of family ritual, and understood, in a way that arrived without drama and without fanfare, that something had broken open in him, not shattered, not collapsed, just opened quietly, the way a crack forms in plaster after years of the house slowly settling into the earth. He stood up. He set his napkin beside his plate. I've lost my appetite, he said, simply, calmly. I'm going to get some air. No one quite knew what to make of it. Amanda frowned slightly. Philip looked up. Patricia said something about fresh bread, and Greg walked toward the back door of the house and stepped out into the cold October evening and stood very still and breathed. He was not angry. Not yet. He was something quieter than anger, something that had no quick name. He was finished. He didn't say anything that night, or the next day. He went back inside after a few minutes, ate enough that it wouldn't become an incident, drove them home, and sat in the kitchen after Amanda went to bed. He made a cup of tea he didn't finish. He looked out the window at the backyard he'd raked leaves from just that morning. He spent 3 days with what he'd heard. Not wrestling with it, sitting with it, letting it be clear. On Tuesday evening, Amanda was in the sitting room with her laptop, working on a client proposal. Greg came in and sat down in the chair across from her. He didn't speak immediately. She didn't look up immediately. That was them. That was the marriage. Eventually she said, without looking up, "Did you want something?" "I heard you," he said. "At Patricia's. What you said to Renata." The room went still. She looked up then. Her expression shifted through several things quickly. Surprise. Calculation. Something that might have been shame if it had been given more room. "Greg, I'm not looking for an argument," he said. I just want to understand something. Have you been unhappy for a long time? She set the laptop aside. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the space between them. I don't know, she said finally. I don't think it's that simple. Okay, he nodded. What's the complicated version? She was quiet. Then, I feel like we stopped being people to each other, like I'm just part of the infrastructure of your life. The house runs, the meals happen, we exist alongside each other. But I don't know, chosen. I don't feel chosen anymore. It was honest. He could hear that it was honest. And even now, even holding what he'd heard through that doorway, he could feel the pull of wanting to fix it, to say the right words, to be, once again, the man who fixed things before you asked him to. But something stopped him. And Philip? He asked. Quietly, without heat. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said carefully, nothing happened. I know, he said, I'm not asking about what happened. I'm asking about what you wanted. The silence that followed was long and told him everything. She said softly, I think I just wanted someone to see me. He looked at her. She was still the woman he had loved. He could see that clearly. But he could also see, finally, clearly, that they had spent years walking in the same direction without ever checking whether the other person was still beside them. And at some point, the distance had become a fact of the landscape, rather than something either of them chose. I think, he said carefully, that we've been two people sharing a house for quite a while. And I think I told myself it was enough. And maybe you did too, for different reasons. She didn't deny it. I don't want to be angry at you, he said. I've been trying to figure out if I am, but mostly what I feel is, I think I need some space. I think I need to not be in this house for a while. She looked up then. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the particular fear that comes when a conversation you thought you could manage suddenly goes somewhere real. Greg, I'm not issuing ultimatums. I'm not making accusations. He stood up. I just need to think, without being in this kitchen, without the routine. He went upstairs and packed a bag. Not everything. Not the kind of bag that means forever. Just enough for a few weeks. He called his old friend Dennis, who had a spare room, and the good sense not to ask too many questions. When he came back downstairs, Amanda was still in the sitting room. She hadn't moved. He picked up his keys. I'll call Nora, he said. I don't want her hearing this from someone else. He left without another word. The door didn't slam. He pulled it shut quietly, the way he always did, the way that had once meant care and now just meant habit. 4 months later, Amanda repainted the sitting room. A deep, muted green, a color she'd had in mind for years, but that Greg had always been lukewarm about. She told herself the room felt new. She told herself it felt like her. She had lunch with Renata twice, and both times found herself talking about the separation in a way that, somewhere beneath the surface, she knew was not quite honest. She framed Greg as emotionally unavailable. She described the marriage as something that had run its course, two people who had grown in different directions. These were not lies, exactly, but they were not the whole story either. Philip had gone quiet. After the separation became known, his messages came less frequently, and then barely at all. There had been nothing between them. She was clear on that, but she had understood, slowly, that what she'd mistaken for a deep connection had been something simpler. He had been available. He had been new. He had been, most importantly, not Greg. And she had let herself believe that was the same as meaningful. She thought about Greg more than she expected to. Not with longing, exactly, but with a particular kind of attention. The way you revisit a conversation after the fact and notice all the things you said and didn't say and couldn't say. She thought about his face in the sitting room that Tuesday evening. The absence of anger in it. The absence of performance. She called Nora once a week. Nora was careful and kind and trying hard not to take sides, and Amanda respected that and also found it quietly painful. There is a specific ache in watching your child be more emotionally mature than you were at their age. Greg, meanwhile, was living in Dennis's spare room with a lamp he bought at a charity shop and a second-hand bookshelf he'd assembled incorrectly and then reassembled on a Sunday afternoon with quiet, methodical patience. He went back to work. He ran in the evenings along the canal, something he hadn't done in years. He read more than he had in a long time. He was not happy. He was not pretending to be happy, but he was present in his own life in a way that felt different from before, less managed, more inhabited. He thought about the marriage often, not with bitterness. He had expected bitterness, had braced for it, but what came instead was something more like grief. The specific grief of realizing that something hadn't broken but had slowly hollowed out, and that both of them had watched it happen and called it stability. He thought about what Amanda had said. "I don't feel chosen anymore." He turned that over carefully, because he recognized honestly that he had stopped choosing her too. He had stopped asking, stopped noticing. He had let the comfort of continuity replace the effort of intimacy, and had told himself that this was maturity. This was what long marriages looked like. He had been wrong about that. He was not looking for redemption. He was not building toward a return. He was simply trying, for the first time in years, to understand himself without the structure of the marriage telling him who he was. One evening in February, he found an old photograph at the back of a drawer at Dennis's house. It wasn't of him or Amanda, just a landscape print left by a previous tenant. But something about it, the emptiness of it, the stillness, stayed with him all evening. He called Nora that night, not to talk about the marriage, just to talk. She told him about a paper she was writing, about a friend who'd got a part in a play, about the terrible coffee at the campus library. He listened to all of it. He laughed at the right moments. After he hung up, he sat for a long time in the yellow light of the charity shop lamp and felt, very quietly, like himself. He wasn't sure he had felt that in years. They met in June at a cafe on West Hall Road, neutral ground, Amanda had said, and Greg had agreed. It had been almost 7 months. They were formally separated, papers drawn up and quietly processed by a solicitor neither of them had ever met before. Nora knew. The aunts and cousins knew. The formalities had been handled with a minimum of drama, which felt appropriate for two people who had always conducted their pain in private. Greg arrived first. He ordered tea and watched the street outside and felt the ordinary strangeness of waiting for someone who had once been the person he came home to. Amanda came in looking well. That was the word that formed in his mind. Well, she wore a coat he didn't recognize, her hair cut slightly shorter, and she had that particular careful composure that Greg had seen on her in difficult situations across 13 years of marriage. She was holding herself together by an act of will, he knew. He knew her well enough to know that. They ordered. They talked at first about practical things. The house was listed, a buyer had shown interest. Nora's end of term. A small administrative matter about a joint account they'd forgotten. And then those topics ran out, the way they always do, and what was left was the thing underneath. "I've been thinking," Amanda said, "about the ways I wasn't honest. With myself, I mean, not just with you." Greg looked at her. He didn't say anything. "I kept telling myself the marriage had just run down, like it was a neutral thing, like weather." She looked at the table. "But I think I was frightened. I think I hadn't felt real in a long time, and instead of telling you, I went looking for it somewhere else. Not physically, but the attention, the feeling of being interesting to someone." She paused. "I was unfair to you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I wasn't there. I should say that. I think I confused being steady with being present. I thought keeping things running was the same as showing up. It wasn't." She looked at him. There was something in her face. Not hope, exactly. More like recognition. "We weren't good at the important conversations," she said. "No," he agreed. "We weren't." They sat with that. Around them, the cafe moved at its ordinary rhythm. Cups clinking, the low murmur of other people's afternoons. It was a strangely peaceful setting for the quiet ending of something that had once been the center of both their lives. "Are you okay?" she asked finally. He thought about it. Not the reflexive version of the question and answer, not fine, not managing, but the real version of it. "I think I'm learning to be," he said. "You?" She nodded slowly. "Same." They finished their tea. They talked a little more. Nothing heavy, nothing that needed resolving. When they stood to leave, Greg held the door for her out of instinct, the way he always had, and she smiled at that. A real smile, small and a little sad. On the pavement, they stood for a moment in the June warmth. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he said. And they walked in separate directions, the way two people do when they have said the true things, and there is nothing left to pretend. And the kindest thing left in the world is to let each other go. Greg walked to his car. He sat behind the wheel for a little while without starting the engine. He thought about 13 years. He thought about Sunday mornings and the back gate and the kitchen they'd renovated together and the way Amanda's laugh could fill a room. He thought about a fork, the small sound it made. He thought about how long he had confused quiet with contentment and routine with closeness and staying with choosing. He started the engine. He drove home to his flat. His flat now, not the spare room. He'd signed the lease in April. And he made dinner. And he ate it at the table by the window. And the evening came in slowly over the rooftops, and it was ordinary, and it was his, and it was, in its quiet and unremarkable way, a beginning.